Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to teach you how to bake game assets from Blender into Substance Painter. First of all of these objects and meshes, the high poly, the low poly, the ID map and everything else is in the description below, so you can follow this tutorial correctly. I hope you learned a lot with this video and let's start. So this is my high poly version and this is my low poly version. Okay? As you can see, the difference are obvious. This is a very high poly object, sculpted with some details and all of that. So we need to put all of this information into the low poly object, which is more optimized for a video game, for example. As you can see, we don't have all of those small details in here, only the base mesh. We can compare the poly count if you enable this option. You can see we have 23 million of triangles. For this one, as you can see, it is only 14K, almost 15K. So this will be the model that we are going to be using in a video game, for example. We need to, of course, bake all of these little details into this low poly version. So in a future video, I'm going to show you how to optimize this model into this one and make UVs correctly. This time this model is already finished. As you can see here, this is completely unwrapped and ready to be texturized, but this time I'm only focusing in the baking process. Okay, by the way, if you want to learn the entire process right now, you can follow my ramen bowl tutorial. The link will be in the video description, so you can watch the entire process and learn how to make a ramen bowl from scratch. It is practically the same method we used here. Okay, let's start. First of all, the low poly version and the high poly version needs to be in the same position. So if you export those two models in this position, then Substance Painter won't understand where the other model is. So they need to be exactly in the same position, as you can see here. We need to import the low poly object and the high poly version. So when you model these, for example, just start making the high poly version and then you sculpt and then you optimize this into a new folder called low. As you can see, make sure you do not move the position of the objects. So make sure they are practically in the same position. As you can see, if I disable the low version, I have the high poly, and if I disable the high poly, I have the low poly version. So this is what we have to do. Here you need to make sure to rename all of these pieces with the same name in both folders. For example, this part of this weapon is called like this, 001. You can rename this as you want, but make sure the high poly version, if you enable the high poly folder, make sure the names, both names are the same for the same piece. Okay, as you can see, this is the same name and this is the same name. Just the difference is the underscore high and this one is the underscore low. So Substance Painter will understand, needs to bake this high poly object, details, all of these sculptures and small details into this low poly version and avoid other pieces with different names. Okay, so you must have the same names for the low poly and the high poly for each part of the object. Okay, here in the low poly, make sure you have a material name. You can have multiple materials for this object or any other model, but this time we only have one material. Make sure you apply scales and rotations before exporting. If you have here not one scale and not zero rotations, you may have some problems in Substance Painter that you may need to fix later. So again, make sure before exporting you have rotation and scale applied. Go to Object, Apply, Scale and Rotations. Also make sure in this option, Face Orientations, you don't have any red part. As you can see, if I invert this part, I'm having here flip normal, so this is not correct. We need to fix all of those red faces, pressing Ctrl N and recalculate normals. Make sure everything is blue. Watching this option, face orientation. Okay, once you have the low poly model finished, everything renamed correctly, a material with the correct name applied to all of the pieces, and the UVs correctly made. Make sure you don't have overlappings here. If you see some selection, for example, something like this, it means that you have overlapping vertices and you need to fix them. For example, if you have a vertex overlapping like this, you will have those selections, so you need to carefully fix them in order to be like this. Okay, once you have all of this, select everything and go to File, Export, FBX. Here you need to export your low poly object. I'm going to call it Stylized weapon underscore low. This is same object I already export. Then select here limit to selected objects only and object types mesh. Also select this option, apply transformations. So it means that if you forgot to apply rotations and scales, those are going to be applied with this. So everything else as default and export FBX. Okay, we already export the low poly version. Then we need to export the high poly version. This is my sculpture. This is finished also and ready to be exported. As you can see, all the face orientations are correct too. All the names are correctly applied. We also apply scales and rotations. This time you don't need a material since this object is not UV unwrap. If you go to the edit mode, as you can see, this is not possible to be unwrapped. This model will be used only as the base information to bake into the low poly version. It means that this object will only be used for that, and if you want to have some renderings for your portfolio. Okay, then select everything, go to File, Export, FBX. Here the same, and you can call it, for example, high, and that's ready, export. Okay, the high poly version is export, but if you don't have a good PC, for example, to handle all of these triangles informations, for example, you can only handle 10 million or 5 million, and if you export this to Substance Painter with this amount of triangles, you may have some crashes or some problems. So if your PC cannot handle high poly models, so I recommend to export this high poly object in different parts. So you can, for example, select this part of the model and disable them. This part, for example, and disable, as you can see, and we have here almost 10 million polygons. So you can select these objects, then go to export, FBX, and the same. We rename these and call these underscore part 1, for example. Then you export this part 1, then hide all of those highlighted objects here using this screen. Remember, you can enable these here in restrictions, hide only the highlighted ones. Then press Alt-H to show the rest of the objects. And you can see here we have 10 millions of triangles. Then you do the same, select all of those objects, go to File, Export, FBX, and here the same but part 2. Simple as that. Now you divide the high poly object into 2 smaller pieces. Okay, that's done. But I did a mistake that I need to fix right now before baking in Substance Painter. This can happen to you many times, but I'm going to show you. These little pieces are not in the low poly folder. As you can see, if I disable the high poly, I don't have those small arrows in here because I want them to be baked into the low poly object. But as you can see, the name of this object is 008 underscore high, which is here. But in the low poly, we don't have 8, only 7 and then 9. So what we can do, as this is not real geometry in the low poly folder, as you can see, I want those small arrows baked into this object. So as I want these arrows baked into this object, the name of those arrows needs to be the same of this low poly object, but the name of this object is 014. So we cannot rename those arrows as 014 because we already have that object called 014 here, as you can see here. So we need to merge these arrows into this piece to have only one with the same name. So select first the arrows and then select this object and press Ctrl J. As you can see now, we have only one piece called 014_high. So it means all of this entire piece, including the arrows, are going to be baked into this low poly object. So perfect. The original FBX in the description below won't have this fixed, okay? You must need to fix this before you export and bake in Substance Painter, so you can learn how to fix this for future models you make. So now, as you can see here, if I isolate only the low poly meshes here, we can see 24 objects. And if I do the same with the high poly folder and select all of those meshes and isolate them, I have only 24 objects too. So this is correct. Now this is finished and ready to be exported. So select everything and re-export this object if you had that error. Remember to select all of those options we made before and replace the high poly export we already export. Okay, perfect. If you did this with the parts method, we need to re-export everything again too. So the high poly object and the low poly object are exported. So now you need to open Substance Painter. Okay, now here in Substance Painter, go to File, New, then Template, keep it in this option, Document Resolution. You may need to work in 2K because 4K may be too lag. Normal matte format. For Blender, we need to use OpenGL. But if you want to work only, for example, in Unreal Engine, you need to work with DirectX. But we are working with Blender only, so I'm going to be using OpenGL this time. By the way, this can be changed in the future too. Okay, here in File, select, go to the folder you export the weapon, and select the low version, this one, and open. Make sure you don't have auto unwrap here. You can also disable import cameras. This is not necessary. So then press OK. Now here we have the low poly object import into Substance Painter, ready to be texturized. But first we need to bake the high poly sculpture into this low poly object to have all of those details we made before. Okay, so make sure to save this project first. Okay, then go to this baking panel here. Here in this square, select this paper, the high poly object we export. If you made this in different parts, for example, you have 2 or 3 parts, select the 3 parts and then open. This time I only have one, so I'm going to open only one. It's loading. Okay, it's finished. It can take some time depending how dense is the polygon of your high poly version. Here in output size, I recommend to work with 4K. Will give you a very decent resolution and quality for the bakes. If you can handle 8K, of course you can, but I'm going to be using 4K this time. Okay, here in max frontal distance, we need to move this slider until you don't see red part. For example, this is not correct. You need to move this slider to the right. You can press Shift for more precision. You can press Shift to move this slow. Okay, now as you can see here, we have the arrows. We need to cover them in blue, all of those. Okay, now make sure everything is blue, no red parts, and this can work. Sometimes you may need to increase this something Let me copy this. Something more, for example, like this. This can give you some errors in cavities. For example, those faces here may be baking in at the front here. So usually you just need to have this level of distance. So I think this can work. So I'm going to save this. Max rear distance is practically the same, but to the interior. So we can keep the default value. Sometimes you need to increase this, but this time this is fine. Okay, here in anti-aliasing, I'm going to be using 4x. You can leave it in none. Sometimes it is not necessary, but if you want some smooth edges, you can use one of those super samplings, but I'm going to be using only 4x this time. Okay, here in match, if you keep this in always, we are going to be baking all of the high poly object into the entire low poly object. So all of the naming process we made here won't be enough, okay? But the problem of this is that everything will be baked into every piece near. So for example, this part can be baked in here, causing some glitches. Those small bars may be baked into the other bar. This trigger may be baked, for example, these faces can be replicated in here. I'm going to show you a simple example of this. I'm going to increase this max frontal distance just to show you the problems of this method. If you don't do the naming process, as you can see here, we have match always, and I'm going to bake this for you only to show as an example. Okay, I baked this, and as you can see here, those bottom parts of this trigger are being baked into this other part. So you may have this problem in some models, and even in video games you can see this sometimes. Just to save times, as you can see here, we have also baking problems. Here, this part of the weapon is being baked into this other part. As you can see, this part too. Here, all of those problems. All of this is caused by the match option. So we need to match only by mesh name. It means what I explained before. It will be baking only this high poly into this low poly. So all of the other objects are going to be completely ignored in this baking process. So make sure you use by mesh name, and of course make sure you have names correctly applied. Okay, now I'm going to decrease this value because this was just for testing purpose. And here low poly mesh suffix, we need to type the suffix we are using in this naming process. This is the default, which is _high, and for the low poly is _low. But as you can see, we don't have anymore the low poly and the high poly matching each other. That's because I'm using it like this. As you can see now, they match correctly. All of those low poly objects now are the same name. Here in normal, everything is fine. Here in wallpaper space normal, it is correct. ID, I'm going to explain this later. In ambient occlusion, this works good as default. Here in curvature, we need to change this option self-interact intersection to this, which is practically similar to the naming process. So make sure you enable all the same mesh name. Here in position, all the same, and the rest is not going to be used for this object. So those mesh maps are the essentials. So this is ready to be baked. I'm going to be baking this right now. Remember to change this to 4K. Okay, it finished. Now we can return to painting mode. We baked this weapon high poly sculpture into my low poly object. As you can see now, we have all of those details and sculptures, as you can see. But we are using only the low poly object we made, not the high poly. So it means that this model now is ready to be texturized. But first, ID maps. As you can see, we don't have ID maps. And you may be wondering why we need ID maps. Okay, for example, if I drag this random material to my object, as you can see, this is being texturized everywhere. So we need to, for example, I just want this part of the object only being texturized with this concrete. This is just an example. So we can press right click and add a black mask. Then here add a paint layer, and with this polygon fill tool we can use the UV chunk fill. If we have correct UV maps, only this cylinder will be masked with this. Okay, as you can see. If you don't have very good UV mapping, you may have this problem. Maybe everything, even those parts, paint. So you may need to be using the polygon fill just to remove those parts. As you can see, doing this manually, and sometimes this will take you a lot of time. So using only polygon fill and this simple masking method will work fine, as you can see, if you have good UV mapping. But sometimes you want to add details on certain parts. For example, those arrows. For example, you want to paint this with concrete and the other part with, I don't know, for example, red, just to show you. You add a black mask, then you add here a paint layer, and you say, oh, how do I paint this arrow? So you can use the brush tool like this and paint this manually. And yes, this can work. You may take some extra time just to paint all of those small details. For example, if you have little bolts along all of your model, you need to paint all of these single bolts manually like this. So the correct way to do this is using ID maps. Okay, but to do an ID map, you need to go back to Blender, and for example, if you have the high poly sculpture here, you cannot enter in edit mode. For example, I want to select only this part of this weapon. You go to edit mode, and you can see this is a mess where your PC will start to lag a lot, since working in the high poly sculpture is quite heavy to work with. Even my microphone may start lagging right now if I do some tasks. So that's why before we made a sculpture like this, we need to make a backup of the original high poly with good topology. Okay, I have this backup. As you can see, is practically the same object, just the difference is here I don't have sculpture. This is only the base high poly object. If I enter to edit mode, now I can work easily here because everything is subdivided correctly and with good topology. So we can now easily edit all of those polygons and paint faster. The sculpture will be used only to bake sculpture details. Okay, then I'm going to go then here back in my high poly object. Of course, all of this will be in the description so you can practice and follow this tutorial correctly. So here in my high poly version, as you can see, I didn't fix this problem I explained before yet. So now here in this high poly, we need to enable here in this viewport shading ball the attribute option here in color. Okay, you will have this because this is the tutorial model, but in a new model you made, this will be completely white, as you can see here. Imagine this cube is your future model. This will be completely white. And for example, you have some faces like this, just to show you, okay? And you want to paint different colors into different faces than to mask in Substance Painter. Okay, here first you need to select everything, go to vertex paint, and here selecting only the brush draw option, you need to select a color. Okay, those colors are going to be also in the description. This is a free color ID palette I made, so you can download this. Those colors are working correctly in Substance Painter. So for example, if you select color randomly like this, some of them may be very similar each other. For example, those are practically different colors. The Substance Painter may understand they are the same. So this palette ID I made will help you to do color painting with different colors for Substance Painter. So Substance Painter can identify all of these colors as different colors. Okay, so select the first one, go to Paint, and set a vertex color. Also, you can add a shortcut here with right click, add shortcut, and paint, as you can see. Then if you want to select another color and paint only this part, if you press the painting shortcut, this will happen. The entire model will be paint, as you can see. So to change this, we need to go first to edit mode and select only the faces you want to be baked with that color. For example, I want this part baked in that color, all of those baked pieces. You can also add seams, selecting only the loop cuts. Add a seam in edge, mark seam, and you can select in face mode with L only those faces, for example those faces. Then go back to vertex paint and here enable paint mask, and now you will be painting only those selected parts. As you can see, now we have different colors for different faces. Now to apply this same method to our weapon, we need to do the same for each part of the weapon. You enter to edit mode, you add a seam here, you add another seam here, then you select only this part with the Alt key, and then you go to vertex paint, enable the paint mask, and paint with the color. Okay, you need to do the same for all of the parts of your object that you want to identify differently in Substance Painter. As you can see, I want this interior part with different color, even that back part will be completely black, so that this part is a different color too, this part is also different color too. You need to play and think which parts you want to paint differently in Substance Painter. Then when you have this finished, I'm going to be fixing this again too. So you need to first select everything and go to Object, convert to Mesh, then select, for example, here the arrows, and do the same process. Select the arrows and then this part, press Ctrl J to join and merge everything. Now select everything, apply scales and rotations, and then go to File, Export, FBX. Then here you can change the name. Instead of calling this as high poly, I'll be using ID map, as you can see here. We select the same we made before, and this will be my ID map. Then export. Okay, then when you export this, you can press Ctrl C a few times if you want to undo all of the process we made converting to a mesh. So if you enter to edit mode, now this is completely broken. As you can see, everything is applied. We need to go back in the history to the convert to mesh object. One ahead. Now we keep the subdivisions levels. Okay, perfect. Now here in Substance Painter, to bake this ID map, you need to go again to the baking panel, and here select only the ID, and here change the color source to vertex color. Okay, this will bake the vertex paints we made, so make sure you select vertex color. Then go back to common settings and here change this high poly or all of the parts you have here, remove them, and then here with the paper select the ID map object and open. Now with this ID map we are going to be baking only the ID channel because we already baked everything else. So make sure again everything is blue, no red parts, and then bake selected textures. You can change the super sampling here. I'm going to be using 4x and bake. As you can see, all of the colors we made in Blender are being baked here correctly. Okay, now if we go back to the painting process, for example, I'm going to show you here. Right click at paint mask, and I paint this with a different color, as you can see. Now I want these little arrows to be green, for example. I'm going to add here a green layer just to show you, and add a black mask. And I want to paint only this part with green. You need to add here a color selection. And here in color selection, pick color, and we select this color. And as you can see, we paint only that part. And if you have a lot of bolts and more of these arrows along the object, all of those arrows with this color are going to be paint green, and you can change this later and even add some other details. Okay, to remove those weird edges or soft them, here over the color selection we need to add a filter called blur. We add a blur, and then here over we add levels, and here you can play with the levels to make the edges softer like this. We can decrease even the blur a little bit. Okay, and we removed some of those problems. If you have small details in the UV unwrapping process, you need to increase specifically this part to make this look with more resolution. But as this is a very small part, in this case it is not necessary. But you can play with all of those values and make this smoother. Okay, and this works for every single material you made. For example, if you have now here this carbon filter, now this one looks bad. For example, this, you can press right click, add a black mask, and here pick color, and you paint only the parts you want in that color easily, as you can see. And this will save you a lot of time masking all of the parts. Okay, of course this looks very bad since the materials are just to test, but that's all. That's the baking process. In a future video I'm going to show you how to texturize all of this weapon in a stylized way using my smart material. As you can see, this is very simple, but I'm going to be showing this process in a future video. This material is available in the description below for free. I made this for you. You can download this and use this in your projects. If you don't have Substance Painter 2024 or the last version, you may not going to be able to use this material. So if you want to learn how to make this material from scratch, you can follow the rock tutorial I made. Since there I'm explaining to you how to make this model from scratch. Base material, meanwhile. Then here select color and add a base color. For example, this one. You can play always with blending options. You have a lot of things to try here. Maybe this can work. Need to decrease the opacity of this, so play with the color, play with blending mode. Everything in the video description again. I forgot to explain you why I have this part separated from the entire weapon. So that's because simply to avoid shadows in the interior. So for example, if you place this part here, all of the shadows in the interior are going to be baked there. So for example, then if you open this as an animation for the game, we'll have a lot of shadows here incorrectly baked. So that's why only. But if you want to place them there, just like this, you need to first bake it in this position as we made, then select the entire new modifications you made. Even you can move the bomb here and place it here. You can select everything now and press export. And here we can rename this to low finished, for example, and then export. Now if you go back to Substance Painter and go to edit, project configuration, here select the load finish object and open. As you can see now, we have the same textures, everything baked correctly with no shadows over there or glitches, and we can modify this weapon lid easily and animate this later. So that's all. You can switch from the low poly original to the finished one again and again, as you can see, with no problems. This is the same process you may be using, for example, for characters. You export this in T-pose, which may be the similar version to this, and then you import the position of character, for example, in a combat position or something else. So that's all. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope you learned a lot how to make this baking process. Again, all the objects, all the meshes, everything else is in the video description. You can download them to follow this tutorial correctly. So thanks for watching. I hope you can leave a like, subscribe, and if you can comment something, that will help to YouTube to recommend this video to more people. Thanks for watching and see you next time.